record. So we are continuing our discussion of an article from Wikipedia on Jewish views of astrology. So I would like to ask you a question. If there's anyone here, I don't want to debate whether astrology is true or not. And I will say certainly as a scientist, I'm certainly not a believer in astrology. But is there anyone here who does believe in astrology? And as we'll see, there's a lot of medieval sages and great people from our tradition who believe in astrology. But I'm just curious if there is anyone here who believes in astrology and would like to explain why. And I'm not going to engage in a debate, but okay, yeah, Cindy, go ahead.
So this isn't exactly what you're asking, but it's the best I can do.
Okay.
So I believe everything in the world is a blank slate onto which we can put our projections, our beliefs, and our desires. So I think a patch of grass would be as true as astrology as a projective slate. So yes, it's true, just like everything in the world is true in the same way.
I'm not sure I
Yeah.
understand.
And I'm going to ask, I think what you're saying is that humans are cause and effect seeking creatures. So, and there's good reason for that. The thunder sounds and we get rain, but we can project that on lots and lots of things for which there may not really be a cause and effect. But so you're not, so with if I hear you correctly, what I understand you're saying is astrology may just be one of those things that we're seeking this cause and effect, and we see it in a bunch of places, so therefore people develop a system.
Right. I wouldn't minimize it with the word just because I think it's powerful. We seek answers, like you said, we seek causation, and therefore we find it. We
Okay.
seek love, and therefore we find it. We seek malintent, and therefore we find it. We seek patterns, and we're going to find them.
Yes, that pattern seeking. That's really that was the word I was looking for.
Pattern seeking.
Okay.
Yes.
Bryce, anything but debating.
I'm not debating.
Yeah.
No. I'm going to say that I see a couple of ways to bifurcate this. One is to say that there is an external reality, and the other is to say that reality is only an internal representation within each human being. So if we take the measure that whatever my reality is my truth, okay, then and that's fine until you go up against nature. Okay, once you're a pattern seeking, pattern recognition, pattern predictive goes up against survival in the world, like we're going to plant now because this happened, and well, that didn't work. Well, the crops just the birds ate it. There's no, and it's like, well, that didn't work out. Well, I thought it would be. Well, that doesn't work out. That's why there's so many Jewish physicists and scientists, because they like to ask a question of nature, make a measurement and an experiment, and then record the results and see if it helps them make better predictions.
Okay. Yeah, so I think what you're arguing is if you test these predictive hypotheses against nature, against experience, for many that would cause a problem unless you so filter what you're seeing in nature through your own experience. But I'm coming at it from a non-believer, so I really don't even want to continue this. But I appreciate your courage, Cindy, and at least taking a stab at this. Okay, so let us share the screen. There's a lot of material here on the medieval era, and we'll read a little bit. We'll read a bunch of it, but as I was looking at it again today, it starts to get tedious. You all have the article, so if you want to read in detail, you can do that. But let's read a little bit of basically Jewish thoughts on astrology in the medieval era. Who would like to read?
I could do it if
Thank
no one
you.
else wants to jump in.
Thank you.
In the medieval era, many rabbis in the Geonic era, and what is the Geonic era?
Actually, Gaonic, I would say.
Geonic, okay.
And well, there it is. After the close of the Talmud, early medieval period.
But why is it called that?
Because the rulers of the Jewish, the scholars who were in charge of Judaism were called the Gaons.
Ah, okay.
And I think
great.
that actually comes from Babylonian times. So I'm surprised it's even this late mentioned there. But anyway, that's my understanding.
All right, thank you. Many rabbis in the Geonic era, after the close of the Talmud, early medieval period, discussed the varying Talmudic and Midrashic views on astrology. One responsum takes a middle view. Otzar HaGeonim 113, Geonim 113, concludes that astrology has some reality in that the stars give a person certain inclinations. However, each person has the ability to overcome their own inclinations and thus maintains free will. Astrology was practiced by some Jews throughout the Middle Ages, both as a professional art and as a science. Coming from the East, Jews were sometimes looked upon as heirs and successors of the Chaldeans. For this reason, Jews sometimes were regarded by the Western world as masters of astrology. Their supposed power over destiny on occasion filled the multitudes with awe and fear. Abraham ibn Ezra was a follower of astrology, which he calls a sublime science. Besides translating another Jewish philosopher, Mashallah, astrological work Questions, and another work of this author on the eclipse of the moon from the Arabic into Hebrew, he wrote Nativity, Sentences of the Constellations, Reshit
Chokmah.
That looked like a K. Reshit Chokmah, Beginning of Wisdom, Book of the World, a treatise on the planets, a treatise on the luminaries, and a horoscope. He often refers to astrology in his Bible commentaries. To him, heaven, with its constellations, is the book of life, in which man's destiny is written, and against which there is recourse to God as the Almighty, who overrules all these influences. A modern scholar summarizes Ibn Ezra's attitude as follows: the deity has delegated to the stars the governance of the sublunar world. Israel, Jews, however, enjoys a special status, which is manifest most decisively in its possession of the Torah. As long as a Jew is engaged in the study and observance of the Torah, he is linked to a spiritual realm, which is itself superior to the stars. In this way, a Jew may liberate himself from the decrees of the stars.
So one of the things that, and I'm going to skip over some of these, just quoting other scholars. One of the things I see in the medieval period is this idea that astrology is real and true, and the position of the stars. It's funny, up here it talked about his books, which he called Nativity. When we hear the word nativity, we all think of you-know-who, but it also means birth. And I guess a basic astrological idea is that the date of your birth, the time and the hour, affects your nature. So one of the things I think that I see in looking over a lot of this material is the idea that the I'll just say broadly, astrology is true and it's predictive and has an influence on us, but we Jews should either recognize God's influence on us as superior, or we should even ignore our astrological or the astrological influences and rely on God. So I see that. For me, I'm particularly interested in Abraham ibn Ezra. As you see from his name, Ibn is Arabic and means the son of. So, you know, in Hebrew, we would say Abraham ben Ezra. Arabic would be Ibn. So as you can tell just from his name, he is living in a in a Muslim culture. I think he lives in Spain, unless I'm misremembering that. And he's his big contribution and typically his commentaries on Torah and Bible are focused on Hebrew and Hebrew grammar and Hebrew structure. The Muslims start studying Arabic and start studying the grammar and the structure of Arabic. Arabic is very similar to Hebrew. So this actually has a great influence on Jewish scholars such as Ibn Ezra, who also start studying the grammar of Hebrew. I'm going to quiet you, Erwin, because I'm getting some feedback. So, but it is interesting, and I saw a couple of different sources about how he is very much a believer in astrology. So there's a couple of, I'm just going to skip these two scholars here, and I did take a quick look at who Gershonides was, and can you see it now? This is Wikipedia on Gershonides. Yeah, so it's one of the things I just found interesting is a reference to something called a Grazia's name. So his name is Levi ben Gershon, and Grazia's was never a word I had never noticed before. I may have seen it before. Is I guess a name, a Greek form of his name. So we have Moshe ben Maimon. We call him Maimonides. We have Nachmanides. We have a lot of these folks. I didn't realize that that is a Greek way of mentioning his name. And anyway, medieval philosopher, 1288, 1344. Bryce, you have your hand up. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, it was about this this belief that Ibn Ezra appears to have. So his belief, then, if I can summarize it, it's not that the stars guide events. What he's saying is that the stars influence your personality and your inclinations.
I don't know. I didn't get that.
Well, you know, what he's saying, if you can overrule the influences, then the influences aren't guiding the events themselves to where we're merely passengers going along. We would have to be something that we, through a strength of will and a reliance on God and the Torah, we could overcome influences on our personalities that would
Yeah, okay. I think that's a fair guess. Okay, would you like to continue reading about Gershonides?
Sure. Gershonides believed that astrology was real and developed a naturalistic, non-supernatural explanation of how it works. For Gershonides, astrology was Gershonides, founded on the metaphysical doctrine of the dependence of all earthly occurrences upon the heavenly world. The general connection imparted to the prophet by the active intellect is the general order of the astrological constellation. The constellation under which a man is born determines his nature and fate, and constellations as well determine the lifespan of nations. The active intellect knows the astrological order from the most general form of the constellations to their last specification, which in turn contains all of the conditions of occurrence of a particular event. Thus, when a prophet deals with the destiny of a particular person or human group, he receives from the active intellect a knowledge of the order of the constellations, and with sufficient precision to enable him to predict its fate in full detail. This astrological determinism has only one limitation. The free will of man could shatter the course of action ordained for him by the stars. Prophecy could therefore predict the future on the basis of astrological determination only insofar as the free will of man does not break through the determined course of things.
And that sounds, I think, a lot like what you were just saying.
So I think actually this is I think a little different from what Ibn Ezra was saying,
So that
because
was, yeah, yes.
because I think what he's saying is that events and the order, I mean, that this astrological order encodes the world, and that this is a predictor of the future, except when it isn't, when people override it. So it has it's has an interesting utility.
Yeah. So I would say for many Jewish philosophers, free will is very important.
Yes.
In mysticism and Kabbalah, we have, an interesting discussion there on free will. But for most, you have to have free will. Otherwise, why would it be just that you're punished for sin? If you were, if you sinned because it was the stars or God or destiny, then it would not be just for you to be punished for those sins. Let's read one more paragraph on Gersonides, and then maybe
Gersonides believed astrology to be a science that predicts events according to set laws of nature, albeit a different set than the ones we are used to. He also believed that a person who has perfected his thinking could interact with the laws of nature through the active intellect. Gersonides thus thought of himself as creating a rationalist and non-supernatural theology. In this sense, there is a similarity between Gersonides and Maimonides.
Okay, let's skip to Maimonides then. Right here.
Maimonides answered an inquiry concerning astrology addressed to him from Marseille. He responded that man should believe only what can be supported either by rational proof, by the evidence of the senses, or by trustworthy authority. He states that he has studied astrology and that it does not deserve to be described as a science. He ridicules the idea that a man's fate could depend on the constellations, arguing that such a theory would rob life of purpose and would make man a slave of destiny.
And he is certainly a rationalist. I'll just read this last one. I mean, there's one 14th century wrote against astrology, and so the Arba'a Turim, which I think means the 4 columns, because if I remember correctly, this is a code of law, an early code of Jewish law, actually had I think either 4 authors writing on different sections. Actually, I can't remember the detail, but it was a very early code of Jewish law, one of the first codes of Jewish law. Brings the views of Maimonides, Joseph Cairo, into his commentary Beit Yosef, quotes Nachmanides, whereas in his code, the Shulchan Aruch, he rules that consulting an astrologer is forbidden without addressing the question of whether astrology is effective. I'm going to skip Luzzatto, and we can jump now to...
He says nice things about you.
Yeah, right. To views of the modern era. Okay, Bryce, would you like to keep reading?
Strictures against astrology appear in the official Torah commentary of conservative Judaism and on the official website of Reform Judaism, and a number of conservative and Reform rabbis have written against the practice. The opinions of contemporary Orthodox rabbis are divided. Some reject astrology altogether, while others continue to follow pre-modern opinions that accept the validity of astrology but limit its practice. Commenting on Deuteronomy 18:9 through 12, Eitz Chaim, the official Torah commentary of conservative Judaism, writes, hence the use of astrology is prohibited. BT Pesachim 113b.
So BT means Babylonian Talmud.
Okay. Similarly, conservative Rabbi Simcha Roth commented negatively on astrology.
Basically, sorry. Yeah, I'll just comment. what you're going to see a lot of is certainly the reform and the conservative movement are characterized by a devotion to rationality. In contrast, I would say what we, you know, in the conservative movement, contrast ourselves with orthodoxy and ultra-orthodoxy and Kabbalistic takes on this. And, you know, some would argue that we went overboard in trying to be rational. Erwin, I will call on you. I muted you because there was some feedback coming or noise coming from your mic. So if you will unmute, I will be happy to call on you. Yeah. Go ahead.
I would like to know if you can tell me where Nostradamus fits in this.
I can answer that with great precision. I have no idea. I don't know. Anybody know anything about Nostradamus? I don't know. I'm pretty sure he wasn't Jewish, but I have no idea about anything else about Nostradamus.
Was he telling the future because of the astrology, or
I don't know. I asked and answered. I don't know a thing about Nostradamus. Anybody know anything about Nostradamus? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay. Sorry, Erwin.
Okay.
We can't help you. So
I understand Nostradamus had a big heart.
No, let's not go there.
However, astrology is by and large nothing more than magic. The Torah is very clear that we are to steer clear of magicians and practitioners of witchcraft. I'm not talking about the David Copperfield type of entertainment. I'm referring to those who believe that their predictions or tricks can have a real influence on the world, and by implication can force God to give them what they want. The idea that if only we could say the right words or take the right actions, God will give us anything we want is nearly idolatrous. It turns God into nothing more than a tool for us to use when we want something, rather than the majestic creator of the world.
And, you know, those of you who have studied particularly Kabbalah with me know that I always make this contrast between magic, which is just what he's saying here. If I can only say the right prayers, you know, eat kosher, wear this funny little hat, put tefillin on, do all these things, I can get God to do my will. That's magic, which he is clearly condemning here. And mystic, which is the same list of things, by the way, prayers, kosher food, funny little hat, everything else, I can get me to do God's will. So that's, I think, certainly an important difference. So let's see what Jeffrey Salkine, who is a colleague and acquaintance of mine, has to say.
He sees to deride astrology as a new age trap. If you visit a Barnes and Noble superstore, you will see what much of American religion has become. There are 3 bookcases for Judaism, 3 bookcases for general religion and Christianity, 3 for general inspiration, 2 each for Bible, Eastern philosophy, and myth, and 9 bookcases for New Age. The New Age menu is diverse, including spiritualism, astrology, and psychic phenomenon, alchemy, tarot, goddess worship, and Wicca, witchcraft, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and reincarnation, angels, Satanism, and the occult.
Okay, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't been in bookstores in quite a while.
Well, not a lot of them around. You have to go to Amazon.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue with modern Orthodox.
Modern Orthodox rabbis have written against the practice as well, some seeing it as forbidden by Jewish law. For instance, modern Orthodox Rabbi Ephraim Buchwald writes, "The Torah tells us in Deuteronomy 18:9 that when the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, they must not follow the abominable practices of the nations that reside there. It is strictly prohibited to cause a son or a daughter to pass through the fire, to practice divination, astrology, or to visit one who reads omens. To follow these practices is an abomination in God's eyes. It is quite extraordinary that Maimonides, virtually alone in the Middle Ages, rejected belief in astrology. In a letter to the rabbis of southern France, he distinguishes between astronomy as a true science and astrology, which he deems to be sheer superstition. Many hundreds of years passed until the Western world came to the same conclusion. Maimonides boldly declares that in Judaism, a person's fate is determined by God alone, not by the stars. Ooh, Jonathan Sacks.
Yep.
The chief rabbi of the United Kingdom Orthodox, Jonathan Sacks, writes, "Wrestling with men since the days of Abraham, to be a Jew is to be an iconoclast. We challenge the idols of the age, whatever the idols, whatever the age. Sometimes it meant wrestling with idolatry, superstition, paganism, magic, astrology, primitive beliefs." In contrast, modern Orthodox Rabbi Nachum Amsel writes, "It seems that most of the authorities believe that astrology has some sort of power, but there is a fine line between believing in this and believing in power other than God, which is not the Jewish view. Thus, one cannot give credence to any power except God, nor use astrology on a regular basis to guide one's life." An article published by the Orthodox Union takes a similar approach. In Judaism, astrology is not regarded as idol worship, even though the generic name for idol worship is avodat kochavim umazalot.
Yes, very, very well said. So avodah, I think most of you know, means worship. Kokavim is the word for stars, just meaning stars, and mazalot can mean constellations. So let's see. So Bryce, why don't you read now their definition?
Worship of the stars and the signs of the zodiac. From the Jewish perspective, the stars are not unrelated to events on Earth. It is not irrelevant whether one was born on Pesach or Yom Kippur or Lag BaOmer or on any particular day. Each day is special and has a unique imprint. On the other hand, if an individual was born under the sign of Mars, the Talmud said that he will have a tendency to spill blood. This tendency can be realized in a number of very different ways, however, which are subject to an individual's choice. In this case, options might be soldier, surgeon, murderer, a sochet, ritual.
I'm sorry, it says, go ahead.
A ritual slaughterer of animals, or a moil, one who performs ritual circumcisions. These options correspond to a potential hero, a healer, one who violates the image of God, to those who do holy work of different types. There is a principle, ein mazel le'Yisrael.
And just a slight correction in pronunciation, ein mazel le'Yisrael.
Ein, like
which means there's
ein rind. Yeah.
Like
okay.
like what?
There was a writer years ago in the past. Ayn Rand. Rand.
Ayn Rand. Yeah, I don't know.
Ayn Rand.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
spelled the same.
Ayn means not, and so there's no mazel for Israel, and here's their definition.
Ein mazel Israel. Israel's fate is not determined by the stars. The Jew, raised in his people's traditions and Torah values, feels the reality of freedom of choice in his bones. So deeply ingrained is this knowledge and feeling that the Jew rarely has cause to think about astrological factors. It is the belief that one cannot escape from the grip of the stars that distinguishes astrology from worship of the stars and the signs of the zodiac. It is always possible to define one's fate by choosing behavior which is guided by morality and integrity within the parameters, intellectual and emotional, physical and spiritual, which a person is given to work with.
So I don't know if no, there's no more quoted from this guy. If I were psychoanalyzing the Orthodox perspective, is one of the things that I find fascinating is there is so much respect apparently for astrology among the Jewish sages who are very well respected, like Ibn Ezra and Gershonides and Nachmanides. So I'm always guessing here that in the Orthodox tradition, they are reluctant to dismiss these people as just being purely superstitious. So they're kind of struggling with not dissing those folks, and but also preserving the idea of free will. And you know, there's a tradition, if someone is born on Shabbat, there is a tradition, you don't hear many kids called this anymore, but to name the person Shabtai. And there are a couple of famous Jews in history whose first name is Shabtai. I often will speak at funerals about a tradition if someone dies on a holy day or something. There's sort of a mystical tradition that this is a sign of merit from the heavens. And again, it strikes me a little bit like what Cindy was talking about, is that we're seeking meaning, we're seeking patterns, we are seeking understanding. So it's certainly not entirely rejected. Let's read a little more. Aryeh Kaplan.
Aryeh Kaplan, known for his rationalist synthesis of modern scientific thinking and Kabbalah, and creator of a modern translation of Derech Hashem, echoes the viewpoint of its author, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, on astrology. In his translation of and commentary on Sefer Yetzirah, Kaplan writes, in order to understand the significance of the astrological forces, we must first understand the role of angels in the chain between the Sephirot and the physical world. The Sephirot are in the universe of Atzilut.
Atzilut? Actually, let me read a little bit here, because otherwise we're going to be tripping over words.
Okay.
The Sephirot are in the universe of Atzilut, and below this is Beriah, the universe of the throne, which serves to allow the Sephirot to interact with the lowest world. Between Beriah and Asiyah is Yetzirah, the world of the angels. Every one of God's words is actually an angel. When we speak of God's world, we're actually speaking of his interactions with the lower worlds. The force that transverses the spiritual domain is what we call an angel. Remember, the Hebrew word for angel is also the same as the Hebrew word for messenger. The stars also form an important link in God's providence over the physical world. Between God and man, there are many levels of interaction, the lowest being those of the angels and the stars. The Midrash thus teaches there is no blade of grass that does not have a constellation, mazal, over it, telling it to grow. As the commentators explain it, God's providence works through the angels, but these angels in turn work through the stars and planets. I actually have, I'm sure I've shown this before. I kind of like this. I think one of my kids gave this to me. A magnet that says it's hard for me to read because I'm seeing a mirror image. Bryce, why don't you read that?
Every blade of grass has its angel that bends over it and whispers.
So I love this because to me, I don't believe it, but I love it. Because what it speaks to is the idea, which is definitely my understanding of Kabbalah, which is that God is intimately involved in everything in the world through messengers. And so again, an important part of Kabbalah, and it's not something I can remember and keep in my head, are different levels of kind of the spiritual realm. And at the highest is God. And in a way, it's similar to the Sephirot, which is an image of the way God interacts with the world. And there are 10 actual levels in the Sephirot. So God interacts with the world. And through, they definitely talk about 4 different worlds. There's 4 letters in God's name. I mean, we get into this. It's endless. The symbolism is endless. but there is the idea. So of course it would be natural to think of the stars, since they're created by God, as being part of this chain. Let me continue with Kaplan.
Let me just ask a
Yeah, go
question
ahead.
about
Sure.
what he's saying here. Every one of God's words is actually an angel. So is he saying, that each one of the words is itself, has an identity as an angel itself somehow? Or is he saying that there are as many angels as there are words in the Torah and the
So first thing you need to do is give up the Christian idea of angels as
Yes,
beings that are
okay.
flying around and
So
guardian angels and stuff
so
like
they
that.
are okay.
Yeah, so I would say is he is referring here to every word of God is a message from
Mm,
God that is sent to us. If a
mm,
message is sent
okay.
to us, we would call that process one of a messenger, which is malach. It's a word angel. So that's how I read what he's saying. But it's going to get even more fun once we get into Kabbalistic astrology. However, Kaplan also writes, faith and trust in God are partners, since one who believes in an omniscient, omnipotent, and benevolent God must also believe that he will provide for his faithful. Therefore, one should trust in God and not be overly concerned with the future. Therefore, one should not seek to ascertain the future by fortune-telling, astrology, or other superstitions. Concerning this, the Torah commands us, you must remain totally faithful to God, your Lord, in Deuteronomy, which some authorities count as a positive commandment. So this is also, I think, another interesting twist. Astrology might actually work, but to be a good Jew, Kaplan is arguing, you shouldn't pay any attention to it, because if you trust in God, you don't need to know the future. What you should be focusing on is obeying the commandments and working in this world. That's exact. And anyway, that's how I understand Kaplan. Erwin, you have your hand up.
I don't understand Kaplan, but I know Ein Sof definitely exists. And I think I remember one of your lectures when you told us when we walk, the creation is
Erwin,
around
you're breaking up in your voice.
us.
Try again.
We have to appreciate that. What?
I couldn't understand what you said about. You said one of my lectures. I said something.
Saying is that that the creation is all around us. When we walk, we see the grass, we see the flower,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
the creation is continuous.
Yes.
So that's where God is, and also when you're talking about Ein Sof, when you're talking about Sefirot, the power goes into the Keter and goes down all the way to the.
So we're actually going to get into Kabbalistic astrology in a moment. And just for those who may not know, Ein Sof is at the highest, and actually it's above the Sefirot. Ein Sof means without end, without limit. And what I would say, your comment about we're surrounded, I think what I will often say is we're surrounded by signs of God's existence, but I wouldn't say these signs predict our future. In the same way that astrologers might say the sign in the heavens, like whether it's Gemini or whatever, gives you traits that you are destined to behave like. Bryce.
Yeah, so this this passage, in a sense, at least I see it this way, is a collision between this advice: don't be overly concerned about the future. God will provide for you, and the whole meaning of what we do in our lives, which a lot of it is concerned with trying to figure out the patterns of the world, anticipating them, and then being able to take advantage of them. which is kind of what our brain really does is notices patterns, and once figuring these patterns out, it then uses this knowledge to plan. Yeah.
So I don't know what Kaplan would say about that. Kaplan actually died at a very young age. I have a few books he's written. I don't know
Maybe he should
what
have
he would
worried
say.
more.
I'm sorry?
Maybe he should have worried more.
Yeah, right. But I think basically, a traditional mystical view of the world is obey Jewish law, basically, and don't worry about the future. Jewish law will take care of you. And in fact, in the world of Israel and Israeli politics and so on, one of the critiques of the government of Israel's support for the ultra-Orthodox yeshivas is they don't teach science and they don't teach Western understanding, which I think is exactly, your critique. And their response would be, we do as much for the world's future by praying daily and keeping kosher and every time we do a mitzvah, even if it's as strange as, saying the morning blessings correctly, that actually heals a bit of the universe. So it's a very different view of the world than I would say is a scientific view of the world. Okay. Let's see. How about we can give me and Bryce a rest? Would someone else like to read on Kabbalistic astrology? Yeah, go ahead, Ken. You need to unmute. Thank you.
Kabbalistic astrology, also called Mazal or Mazalot, zodiac destiny, is a system of astrology based upon the Kabbalah. It is used to interpret and delineate a person's birth chart, seeking to understand it through a Kabbalistic lens. Most astrologers cast and use horoscopes to depict planetary placements which are believed to influence daily activities. Kabbalistic astrologers tend to take a slightly different approach because they wish to observe the planets as they relate to each sephirah in the tree of life. Each sephirah points to a specific character trait. Each sephirah is the trestle board, or in the trestle board corresponds with a specific planet and is therefore closely aligned with the celestial art of astrology.
So again, just to review a little bit, I probably should have had a chart ready for you to see. The Kabbalists understand the nature of God as being tenfold, which I often will comment on for people who criticize a Christian understanding of God as being threefold. The Kabbalistic understanding of God is tenfold, beginning with Keter, which actually Erwin mentioned, which means crown. And above Keter, about which we can know nothing, is Ein Sof. And then it goes down through a total of 10 different aspects of God. And they are things like Gevurah, which means strength, and Chesed, which means loving kindness, and Tiferet, which means splendor. So they are characteristics of God. And then what we're going to see now, I'll let you read the introduction, and I'll just show you the Hebrew calendar corresponding to the zodiac. So Ken, why don't you just read the introduction there?
The work Sefer HaMatzalot identifies the 12 constellations of the zodiac with the 12 months of the Hebrew calendar. The correspondence of the constellations with their names in Hebrew and the months is as follows.
Yeah, and we saw, in the images from the movie Fiddler on the Roof, the different kinds of signs of the zodiac and their Hebrew name, and they correspond to the 12 months. And also, many people see that there's a correspondence between the 12 tribes of the 12 sons of Jacob and the 12 tribes of Israel. And then let's take a look down a little further with planetary correspondences.
Each of the 10 Sephirot corresponds to an astrological feature. These astrological astrological correspondences exists in the world of Asiya, the lowest of the four worlds of Kabbalah.
So here's another chart. And here's now the names of the different Sephirah from Keter, Crown, Chokhmah. Chokhmah, I think, is wisdom. Bina is knowledge. Chesed, loving kindness. Gevurah, strength. Tiferet, splendor. Netzach, I can't remember exactly the definition of Netzach. Hod, which is, I think also, these are all sort of strength images. Yesod actually is a foundation. And then Malchut, which is also the Shekhinah. Malchut means the kingdom. So that's the lowest one. That's God's presence in the world. And so they're, as was mentioned before, connected with astrological signs. I think we're just about done with this. Let's read one more bit of discussion, which should sound very familiar to all of us. Mystical connection.
The ancient Hebrews were well aware of the sun, moon, and 5 planets seen with the naked eye, and Hebrew mysticism recognized their great importance. Therefore, along with the 4 lunar phases being slightly over 7 days, 7.4 days about, each, the number 7 was held in very high regard. The Torah reflects this with Genesis 1:1 being 7 words and 28 letters in its signature or in its original Hebrew. This is known as God's signature.
Yeah, so here's a great example. You know, the first verse of the Torah has 7 words and 28 letters. So, I mean, you might just say it's a coincidence, we're looking for it, or you might say this is just another reflection of how carefully the Torah is put together. Let's continue with one more paragraph.
Genesis 1:14, and God said, let there be lights in the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons, days, years, and festivals, the 4th day of 7. The number 7 is the great recurring numerical theme of the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. The menorah's 7 lamps on 6 branches corresponds to the lights of the 7 classical planets: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Okay, and you know, there's in this article which I sent you, there are a lot of other places to look, you know, connections with other items, and only 43 footnotes, and actually a very long list of, I guess that's a bibliography, and then more further reading and external links. So there's no shortage of the material. I'm going to stop sharing.
Go back up.
Go ahead.
Could you go back up a little bit? Go back
How
up.
far? How far?
To the end of what you got to before all of the millions of footnotes.
Okay.
Okay, right there.
Up a little bit.
7 classical planets, and do they talk about oh no, they don't. No, they don't. Sorry, never mind.
Okay. Yeah, so what I mean, the 7 visible moving objects in the sky is something, Bryce, you have talked about, and
Yes.
and I think clearly it probably is the origin, you know, unless you just say the origin is divine origin, it's probably the origin of the number 7 being so important. And even in the Sephirot, there are 3 kind of upper levels of the Sephirah, and the 7 lower levels are understood as being those that are much more interactive with the world. And I will just say, I'm going to stop sharing. We can chat a little bit. Also, what I will say is, you know, occasionally I will be referred to as, I'm sorry, not referred to. People will refer me to Jewish astrologers or Jewish mystics with websites, and you will see a lot of this language. I mean, they will have, you know, astrological charts, and, you know, we'll do readings for you. So it sounds very familiar to me in terms of that world of people that do readings of things. And, you know, even my daughter, my middle daughter, used to read tarot cards in New Orleans for people. And I remember she did some readings of, you know, people in our family, which were quite remarkable. If I had to explain it in a scientific sense, I would say that the tarot cards are almost like Rorschach, and as people look at them, they give off signs and indications, and people verbalize them. But again, I'm not. I don't know, Cheryl, you might want to. I saw you nodding. You might want to comment on that. But the main point I wanted to make, and maybe we just spent too much time doing this, is that astrology has a significant place in Jewish history, and for me it's interesting for no other reason that we always keep saying Mazel Tov or Mazal Tov, and that is a connection to astrology. So, any thoughts or comments? Okay, so I think I'm going to stop the recording.